Yeah, I think now would be a good time to talk about Switzerland because I think they have a different approach so I think the basic idea behind Swiss healthcare, there's not any free state provided health insurance, but private health insurance is mandatory for everybody, which also I don't think is necessarily a bad thing because similar to what we talked about before in the Singapore video, like every single person has the risk of having some health crisis happen to them. So I think it's probably a good thing to make sure that everybody has money set aside or some type of insurance to make sure that everybody, if that happens to them, can actually get the care that they need, rather than all of a sudden this thing just coming on them all at once and them having to pay a ton of money just out of pocket for it, which could lead to bankruptcy, could lead to death, could lead to them not being able to pay for it. So I think just making sure that people have the money set aside and also making sure that there is some basic safety net if they don't have enough money or something incredibly disastrous happens. I think that's generally a good thing. Just because I don't think it's pro freedom to allow people to live with this constant risk hanging over their head. It's just going to limit the number of minds in society, the amount of people that can actually like think, pursue their self-interest, can innovate, can do all those sort of things. Thoughts on a sugar tax to discourage unhealthy eating habits? I don't know. I think health needs to be something that people can take into their own hands, for the most part. I think healthcare. I think everybody needs healthcare, but I also don't think that the government should make personal choices for people. I think it maybe makes sense to make sure that they can like put money aside for them, or make sure that they actually have the money to pay for health disasters when they need it. But I don't think that they should actually make those health decisions for people. I think that's a stretch too far. I think people should be able to act freely. But I guess, yeah, I think the distinction here is there's certain things that every single person needs, like healthcare, education. Everybody needs access to some level of quality for that. Everybody needs access to some level of it that is at a certain level of quality. And I think that part should be guaranteed in some way, whether that be through providing it, which is probably my last option when I'm thinking about this, or by making sure that they set money aside for it. Because if they don't have that money set aside, if they can't get those things, then they can't really live. You can't really live a life if you don't have healthcare. I don't think you can't really live. I think the healthcare argument is a little bit more difficult to make, but I think the education one is obvious, because education is very clearly something that every single person needs. Like the amount of education that you have as a child is going to, or the quality of education you have as a child is going to determine a lot of what happens with the rest of your life. It's possible to get a bad education and still turn out fine, but it's very rare and uncommon. It really, like, your childhood sets a lot of your values, a lot of your way of thinking about things and approaching things. So I think quality education, like an access to quality education for every single person, is very necessary. Healthcare is similar, not for the same reasons though. I think healthcare is something that every single person needs, just based on the fact that we all have a risk of a disaster happening to us. And I think everybody needs to have access to healthcare, so to some level of healthcare because of that. For one, because that risk could constantly hang over your head. And for two, you could just be building up a life, building up something, pursuing a career, pursuing a family, and all of a sudden that can just, in a second, just be taken from you. And I don't think forcing people to have to, or requiring that people pay for that out of their own pocket, without like making sure that they have money set aside or making sure that they have health insurance, I don't think that's a good policy ultimately. We do live in a society. But let's look at this a little bit. So the healthcare in Switzerland, there's no free state-provided health services, which I think is a good thing. I think free health-provided services, as we talked about before, it very much incentivizes people just to go to the doctor for any like bad feeling that they might have, and it leads to wasteful health insurance essentially, and it leads to high wait times, very inefficient service. wasted resources, wasted time, money, resources on just because people are always incentivized for any problem they have to go seek health insurance. So I think that's a major problem. But private health insurance is compulsory for all persons residing in Switzerland. I think that's probably reasonable because I think that everybody should sort of be required to have something set aside, to have something in case the worst happens, in case their body malfunctions on them. Do you think the American healthcare system created the opioid crisis? Yes, to an extent. I think we have an obsession with prescribing pills to people, to just giving people this one pill to fix all their problems. And I think opioids are sort of related to that because doctors were very much incentivized to just prescribe opioids constantly to everybody. Like every time there's a surgery, like when I got my wisdom teeth taken out, I think they gave me like Oxycontin or Oxycodone. There's some drug that they gave me that was an opioid. There's a difference between those words. I don't know what it is though. I never took it. I didn't really have that problem, the problem with it. But the fact that they would just give that to me for something so small, it's like, why are we just handing that out, you know? It's like, I can understand it in certain circumstances if you went through a really brutal surgery, but for something minor, it should be like, okay, I'm feeling pain. Now I'm going to go get it. Like, go say like, hey, I'm feeling this immense pain in the back of my mouth. Like my wisdom teeth, this wisdom teeth operation is causing me a lot of pain. So I got to go get this, get these pills now, but it shouldn't be provided before you actually have the pain. But I don't necessarily know how to solve that. But here, let's watch this Swiss healthcare thing. I think Switzerland appeals to me a little bit more than Singapore, just because it's mostly done privately through the private sector. I'm a bit skeptical of the state doing everything for you, because I think that limits freedom and the ability for you to choose between different options. Because if the state starts making bad decisions, then that affects everybody. But if one private insurance company starts making bad decisions, well, that affects everybody for a little bit within that insurance company, but then they can move somewhere else, and then that will incentivize these insurance companies to continue to provide good service. But it seems like also Singapore isn't necessarily dealing with that problem, so.
The American identity begins when Benjamin Franklin knit the American colonies together.
Franklin is endlessly interesting.
Printer, scientist, revolutionary.
He is the only founding father who evidently had a sense of humor.
His vision is broader than the American Revolution.
The things that he spoke of, that he wrote about, had a certain amount of power.
He really was an American genius.
Benjamin Franklin starts Monday, April 4th on PBS and the PBS app.
We return now to our special series on universal health.
This is going to be a quiet
Since
video.
The pandemic
Let me
began,
turn this up. Let me turn this up for you guys.
A growing number of Americans think the U.S. healthcare system is below average compared to other nations. That is according to our latest PBS NewsHour Marist poll. As the U.S. considers changes, William Brangham and producer Jason Kane traveled to Switzerland, which has preserved the private insurance market while still achieving universal coverage. Like this whole series, this story was filmed before the pandemic erupted.
The Swiss shop for health insurance a lot like they shop for their groceries. There's a wide array of choices.
You want a cheese? Which one?
This cheese or that one?
I think that's pretty based. I think having lots of options, lots of competition is good. I'm a huge fan of capitalism. I'm a huge fan of the free market and just providing lots of options and competition. So,
one with the high deductible or one with the high premium. For all Swiss families, like the Prestons, it's a system that in some ways is even more market-driven than our own. But the big difference? Everyone here is covered. The idea behind it is what's known as social solidarity, and it's what impressed American-born Jason, who's a teacher, when he moved here and married Sabine, who is Swiss.
I mean, for me, it's just sort of a basic right, and they seem to appreciate that. That like.
Do you see it that way too? I know that the Swiss talk about it that way. Do you buy that idea that healthcare is a right?
Yes, because, I mean, coming from where I come from, this sort of negativity in the States that, well, if you're poor, then it's almost like you deserve to die, right, for being poor. It's like you're being punished for circumstances that are outside of your control. It may not be said like that explicitly, but that's kind of the feeling, the vibe that's given off that, well, if you can't afford it, well, then you don't deserve to be well.
Yeah, that sort of idea, I don't necessarily agree with his wording of it, but that's a problem that I had with the way that objectivists approach like free market politics, because it's like I don't really want people to die. I don't want less minds to be active in the world and pursuing their own self-interest and innovating and thinking of new things, but not ensuring that people can get healthcare when they need it, even if it's just like critical care. I'd be a fan of like a health insurance system where it's just like, okay, if you desperately need it, then maybe we'll fund it. But if it's like not really something you need, then no reason for the government to even step in. But I think allowing something like that to take place is very dangerous, where people can just like be building something, be pursuing their self-interest, be pursuing some innovation that they're working on, and then all of a sudden something happens and all of that is just lost. Yeah, I'm very pro freedom of the human mind to pursue innovations and pursue its self-interest, because I think that ultimately leads to the best outcomes, because individual pursuit leads to progress in a society, economic progress in a society. Yeah. Because I think individual minds are the only sort of things that can continually innovate, can continually move forward and come up with new ideas. And when that's shackled in any way, or when it dies off, it's like, okay, these innovations aren't going to come around anymore. It feels like you're being punished for being poor. This is a dishonest formulation. Possibly.
Health insurance in Switzerland is costly. Jason and Sabine pay about 16% of their income on premiums. On top of that, the average Swiss pays more out of pocket for things like co-pays than the average American. But the Prestons like the care they get, and they like buying into a system that protects everyone.
Here it's a bit more humane. It's like, look, there's a basic level of care that people deserve. It costs, but you still deserve it. And I think the Swiss government's commitment to that is spot on.
This is
Yeah, I like that. I like it when things cost money, and are priced, because that allows for efficient economic allocation. However, people should be able to, if people need a basic level of access to a certain level of quality, I think it's necessary that they get that.
One of the men who helped design that system. Thomas Zeltner was Switzerland's State Secretary of Health for many years and is now a consultant to the government and, until recently, chaired one of the country's private insurance companies.
In the 90s, there was a debate on, is healthcare such an essential part of well-being and feeling safe in your country and in your neighborhood, that you want that everyone has access to it. And actually it was something like 70% of the population who said, we want that.
That is a resounding yes.
Yeah.
Zeltner says one of the crucial innovations was separating health insurance from employment, which has allowed the Swiss to keep their health insurance during the pandemic, while millions of Americans are losing theirs when they lose their jobs. They've been able to separate the two, but instead of making the government the single payer, like in the UK, they've made it so that a wide array of insurance companies can flourish.
And the fun thing is you can choose, and I just told a friend, I can choose to go to the barber here or there. Since 30 years, I go to the same barber. But the option to be able to choose is, kind of a freedom.
It is a freedom, and it sort of places a check on these insurance companies as well. Like, America actually doesn't have that much competition in healthcare. Like, I don't think you're allowed to purchase health insurance across state lines. I know that was the case in before. I don't know if that's changed. I assume it hasn't, because we don't really do much with our healthcare. I don't feel like there's been much done in general there.
This is all now baked into society, as Swiss is the country's famously punctual rail system. There are roughly 60 private companies selling plans, but the Swiss government does take a firm hand in regulation. It mandates basic coverage all plans must include, and the government sets...
Okay, I think that's okay, because I think you need to have a basic level of quality. You need to have a basic level of coverage. Every single person needs that. That's kind of been the main point that I want to harp on. I think when there's something where everyone needs access to a certain level of quality or a certain amount of care, like a certain amount of coverage, I think that's some time where the government needs to say, hey, we need to make sure that everybody has this. We can't just give people the option of like saying no to this. Like that is, yeah, I think that's inherently irrational, and allowing for someone to have the choice to just like kill themselves, essentially, just to completely ruin their lives, is not necessarily a choice that I think people should have, because it overall limits their freedom to allow them to make that choice. Yeah, like if you like think of it in a hypothetical certain sense, where it's like, let me think of a good hypothetical. Should we? No, never mind. I can't think of a good hypothetical right now.
The prices that can be charged for medications and procedures. Depending on the plan they choose, the Swiss can pick their own doctors and avoid needing referrals for specialists. Wait times for procedures are low, in part because doctors get paid well, there's lots of them, and the system is competitive. I met up with New York University's Victor Rodwin. He's a health policy expert who's traveling across the country studying its healthcare system.
The Swiss have the lowest avoidable mortality rate, which means mortality amenable to healthcare intervention.
Interesting.
It means the lowest rate of people who die, who shouldn't die. The U.S. has the highest.
The Swiss live about 5 years.
See, that's interesting. I think that's an incredibly important statistic. Yeah, let's listen to that again.
To healthcare intervention. It means the lowest rate of people.
The lowest rate of people who die because they don't, like when they don't have to die. I think that's incredibly important. I think people need that basic level of care. I think that's sort of the principle that I've been harping on. People need to survive, at least. Like if there's a possibility that someone could die from this, or if someone's dying and health insurance could save them, I think health insurance, that amount of coverage should be provided to everybody. Everybody should have access to that.
Who die, who shouldn't die. The U.S. has the highest.
What's their policy on weed? I'm not actually sure. Hopefully it's legal. I mean, it should be. Tremendous Pain says it's overrated. Honestly, I agree. Weed is overrated. I don't know. It kind of just turns you into a vegetable. It's not the best experience. But should it be legal? Of course. I think it's absurd to lock someone in a cage because they smoked a little bit of weed. Like, it's like, okay, who are they hurting?
The Swiss live about 5 years longer on average than we do, and they're a lot healthier than we are, suffering far lower rates of asthma, diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension. Rodwin credits part of that to Swiss healthcare, a system which polls incredibly well here.
They express high confidence in the medical profession and high confidence that if the problem occurs, they know they're covered. There's a sense of quality in this country which goes from chocolate to cheese to watches. And in healthcare, it's the same. They do things carefully and at generally high quality.
Swiss officials say there's another main reason they achieve these results. It requires everyone.
Who needs weed when you can have a ham sandwich? True. But what if you could have a ham sandwich where the ham is an edible, where the ham is laced with weed? Or take some mayo, spread it on there, put some RSO in there, let the RSO dissolve in the mayo, and then eat that. That sounds, wow.
Like Mel Hersig, to have insurance, no excuses. It's similar to the individual mandate with the Affordable Care Act, but unlike the ACA, this mandate has sharp teeth. the government will garnish your wages if you don't comply.
Very neat.
That's partly how they get to universal coverage, but for young people like Hersig, who don't need a lot of medical care, it can seem like a big imposition.
So what happens if you don't buy the insurance? What happens to you?
Well, it's also like you have to be registered to get a job, you have to have an address, you have to then show the local council office your proof of health insurance and blah, blah, blah. So they can chase you down quite easily.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
And if the government wasn't forcing you to buy health insurance, do you think you would buy it anyway?
No, I wouldn't have it for.
Just because that monthly cost is too much?
Mm-hmm. And because I don't use it, I don't get my money's worth out of it.
I don't think that's very intelligent. I feel like it's incredibly important just to have that, just in case something disastrous goes wrong. Or even, I mean, also just getting medical checkups every month or whatever. Or no, not every month, every year is incredibly important for your health, because then then when you go in, they can catch something, but if it's going wrong before it goes disastrously wrong.
The government offers premium subsidies for lower income workers, and it caps yearly out-of-pocket expenses. So, unlike the US, people rarely go bankrupt from medical bills.
That's the list of all your debt.
But those premiums can sometimes lead to serious debt for middle-income families. This woman didn't want her name revealed because of the stigma around debt. Her husband had multiple surgeries, lost his job, and their income dried up.
We were getting subsidies to help pay for the health insurance, but we still had to pay a large portion ourselves.
And even with the subsidy, it still was unaffordable.
At the time, it was unaffordable for us, yes. I think it is expensive, but I think the healthcare is also very good.
So even though the costs put you at real financial peril, you still see some benefit to the system.
Because I see that if everybody pays into health insurance, it makes the quality of health insurance better for the population.
Intensive care is very expensive.
Brown University's Dr. Ashish Jha studies healthcare systems around the world, and he traveled with us for this series as a collaborator.
I think what's really remarkable about what we've seen here in Switzerland is it's a totally different model for achieving universal health coverage, making sure everybody has access to health care, providing high quality care, in a way that's so different from what the UK does through the national.
One thing, I don't think necessarily everybody needs to be provided high quality healthcare. I think everybody needs to not necessarily be provided, but make sure that they have the ability to afford basic coverage. I think that is something that was true about the Singaporean healthcare system when we talked about that, and is also true about the Swiss healthcare system. They guarantee a basic level of coverage. I don't think you need to guarantee like the maximum coverage in the world. I think you need to guarantee access to basic coverage. Like if you're gonna die, like you should have the money set aside. You should have the insurance to be able to cover that. And I think it doesn't necessarily need to be provided, but I think that should be like something that is required that everybody have it. However you go about doing that.
Health service, and actually in many ways pretty different from the US approach.
John notes the US, of course, is a much bigger nation than Switzerland, has a higher poverty rate, and the Swiss have a more robust safety net. But there's more.
And that is kind of the rule-following mentality of the Swiss, that the government says you must buy health insurance, and everybody says, yes, okay, we will buy health insurance. As opposed to in America, where we bristle when the government tells us we have to do anything, and we bring up the broccoli argument, what if the government made you eat broccoli? The Swiss don't worry about eating broccoli. If the government thinks that's something we ought to do, we'll do it.
That's a little iffy. I think there's a difference between mandating a basic level of coverage that everybody has, mandating a basic need that everyone has, versus like saying, oh, you have to eat this specific thing, do this specific thing. I think that's stupid.
In that way, it is very different, and it allows the Swiss health system to function differently than what we've been able to do in the US.
For the record, the Preston girls, not big fans of broccoli, but Sabine and Jason are fine with it. They also know the insurance mandate costs them a lot, but they see it as part of the greater good, part of being Swiss. For the
Oh, that's a gross thing to say. I don't like the greater good.
PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham in Oberhofen am Thunersee, Switzerland.
I think it's good because it provides you with maximal freedom. Because once you have that out of the way, once that's covered, once you don't have that risk hanging over your head, then you can actually like pursue your life in a way where you're not concerned about that risk. You can maximally pursue your life. You can pursue it in the most aggressive way possible. Dude, the mountains were kind of fire. The Swiss Alps. Oh my gosh. Hold up. Give me some beautiful pictures, please. Oh my gosh. Bro, if I was living here, I wouldn't even care. I wouldn't even need healthcare. I can just go live in the mountains and just, I don't know. I could go, oh my god, look at that. Just go chill in the mountains and just die out there without my healthcare. Honestly. Yeah, that's beautiful. Oh my gosh, I need to move to Switzerland. Holy shit.